She knocked on my door on a Wednesday evening. I know it was Wednesday because I remember specifically not wanting it to be Thursday. Thursday was my daughter's piano recital, and I had been managing the logistics of it since Monday. The kind of parental coordination that requires a level of mental load I had not anticipated when I signed my daughter up for piano 3 years ago, but that I had come to accept as simply part of what Wednesday evenings contained. The Thursday recital was occupying a corner of my mind the way important upcoming things occupy a corner of your mind, not demanding attention, but present, humming. The doorbell rang at 6:52. I opened the door. She was standing on my front step in the Phoenix evening light, which in October is the particular quality of light that makes this city beautiful if you look at it from the right angle. Warm, amber, the desert air still holding the day's warmth even as the temperature starts to drop. She was about my age, dark hair, dark eyes, wearing the kind of clothes you wear when you have come from work and not had time to change. She had a ring on her left hand. I noticed the ring because of its specific quality. Not elaborate, a thin gold band with a small diamond set simply, the kind of ring that is made for a person who does not want the ring to be the statement. I have a ring exactly like it on my left hand. Not similar, the same. She said, "My name is Rebecca. I think we need to talk. Before I tell you the rest, subscribe, because every story on this channel is real, it is raw, and it will stay with you. And drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one." Now let me tell you what Rebecca told me. My name is Diana. My husband's name is Nathan. We had been married for 7 years when she knocked on my door. We met in Phoenix when I was 28 and he was 30 at a work event. I am in real estate development, he does contract law, and we were at a conference that served both industries and that neither of us had wanted to attend, but that we had both been sent to by our respective offices with the specific expectation of networking. He was the only person at the entire conference who seemed to share my view of the conference, which was that it was too long and the food was bad and the panels were covering ground that had already been covered in the same format 3 years running. He said so quietly to me at the coffee station between sessions, and I laughed and said, I had the exact same thought. We spent the lunch break talking about everything except the conference. We went to dinner that night. We were married 2 years later. I want to tell you about Nathan before I continue, because he is not a simple person, and what I am telling you is not a simple story. Nathan Reyes is, by any external measure, a careful man. He has been a contract attorney for 12 years, and he is good at it in the specific way that careful people are good at law. He reads everything. He misses nothing. He has a quality of attention in professional settings that his clients pay for and that produces results. I have watched him work occasionally, and what I see is a person who is constitutionally incapable of leaving a loose end in a contract unaddressed. He is also, in his personal life, a person who grew up taking care of things himself. His mother died when he was 11. His father worked long hours and was not present in the way that mattered. Nathan and his older sister managed. They did not ask for help because there was no one to ask. They handled what needed to be handled, and they did not burden anyone else with the weight of things that were theirs to carry. I knew this about him when I married him. I knew it the way you know a partner's history, in the outline, not in the specific ongoing consequences. I knew that he had been raised to handle things alone. I did not understand until the Wednesday in October that he was still being raised by it. 7 years. A house in Arcadia, one of the Phoenix neighborhoods with the old trees that make it feel different from the rest of the city. Shaded and established. The streets lined with the kind of landscaping that takes decades to grow, and that makes the neighborhood feel, in the middle of the desert, like somewhere that has been a home for a long time. A daughter, Ellie, who is 6 and who plays piano and who has the specific quality of focus at 7 in the morning that I have never possessed, but which I recognize, watching her, as her father's. She was standing on my front step with the same ring. I said, "Come in." She came in. I closed the door. We stood in my front hallway and looked at each other with the specific assessment of two women who have just understood something and are deciding, simultaneously, how to proceed. I said, "Tell me." She said, "I was married to Nathan for 4 years. We divorced 3 years ago." I said, "I know about the divorce." She said, "Did you know we were still married when he married you?" The hallway was very quiet. I said, "What?" She said, "We were still legally married when you and Nathan got married." I did not find out until last month, when I tried to file my taxes with my new husband, and our accountant ran into something that required documentation from the divorce. I started looking. The divorce was filed, but never finalized. The paperwork was never completed. I said, "That's not possible." She said, "I have the documentation. I brought it." She held out a folder. "I'm not here to cause problems. I have a lawyer, we are addressing the legal situation, and it will be resolved. But I felt you deserved to know, because if I were in your position..." She stopped. She said, "I would want to know." I took the folder. I said, "Give me a minute." She stood in my hallway while I opened the folder and read. I am a real estate developer. I read contracts for a living. I read the documents she had brought, the original divorce filing, the correspondence, the gap in the record where the finalization should have been, and I understood what I was looking at. I said, "Does Nathan know you came here?" She said no. I tried to call him first. He didn't answer. I left a message. I decided not to wait. I said, "When did you leave the message?" She said, "This morning." I said, "Did he call you back?" She said no. I stood in my front hallway with a folder full of documents, and I thought about the specific nature of what I was holding. I said, "How long have you known?" She said, 3 weeks. I told my lawyer immediately. He contacted Nathan's lawyer, the one from the original divorce, last week. I came to you because I did not know if anyone was going to tell you directly, and I thought... She stopped again. I thought you deserved to hear it from a person, not a legal filing. I looked at this woman standing in my hallway. She had driven to my house on a Wednesday evening in October to give me the worst possible information in the kindest possible way. I did not know her. I knew her ring. I knew her husband's signature at the bottom of a divorce filing. I said, "Thank you for coming." She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "It's not yours to be sorry for." She gave me her phone number. She left. I stood in my front hallway alone and I thought about Nathan, where he was, what he knew, what he had done or not done 3 years ago when a paperwork error had been made and not corrected. My daughter was in the living room watching television. Her piano recital was the next evening. She was 6 years old, and she did not know that anything in her world had just shifted, and I intended to keep it that way for as long as I could. I want to describe what I was feeling standing in that hallway, because it is the part of this story I have had the most difficulty putting into language. I had just been told that my marriage might not be a marriage, that the man I had built 7 years with had, possibly through error and possibly through something less forgivable than error, been legally married to another woman when he married me. The folder in my hand contained documentation that should not have existed. The woman who had brought it had the same ring. What I felt was not what I would have predicted. I would have predicted panic. What I actually felt was a particular, concentrated stillness. The stillness of someone whose mind has received information that is too large to process immediately, and that has therefore triggered a kind of suspension, a holding everything in place while the processing begins. I am, professionally, a person who deals in risk assessment. Real estate development is not engineering and not law, but it requires a specific tolerance for uncertainty, for entering situations where many things are not yet known and making decisions anyway, based on the best available information, with the understanding that new information will require revision. I have learned to not be panicked by incomplete pictures. I have learned to ask, what do I know and what do I not yet know? And what does the gap between them require of me? Standing in the hallway with Rebecca's folder, I applied this. What I knew. There was a documentation problem. It was being addressed legally. Rebecca had come to tell me in person because she thought I deserved to know. Nathan had known since that morning and had not called me. What I did not know, whether the documentation failure was an error or a choice. What Nathan had been thinking for the 8 hours since he found out. What our marriage was, legally, at this moment. What the gap required of me, a phone call. I went into the kitchen. I called Nathan. He answered on the second ring. I said, Rebecca was just here. There was a silence of perhaps 2 seconds. He said, Diana. I said, when did you know? He said, this morning, when her lawyer called mine. I said, this morning. He said, yes. I said, and you came home tonight and said nothing. He said, I was trying to understand it first. I said, Nathan, you came home tonight and had dinner with me and put our daughter to bed and said nothing. He said, I know. I said, was it an error? The divorce paperwork, was it an error? He was quiet. He said, I don't know. I said, what does that mean? He said, it means I hired a lawyer and the lawyer filed the papers and at some point the finalization didn't happen and I should have followed up and I didn't. Whether that was an error or whether I don't know. I said, you don't know if you made a paperwork error or if you failed to finalize your divorce on purpose. He said, I know how that sounds. I said, I need you to come home. He came home. We sat in the living room after Ellie was in bed, sitting in the room where she had been watching television an hour ago, the room with the drawings she had made that were still on the refrigerator, the room that was so thoroughly ordinary and domestic that it should have been impossible for anything this extraordinary to sit inside it. He sat across from me. I said, tell me the truth. Did you know? He said, not consciously. I said, what does that mean? He said, it means I filed. The lawyer filed. There was a period when things were being processed and she and I were barely speaking, and I moved on. I started seeing you. I fell in love with you. When you asked about my divorce, I said it was finalized because, in my mind, it was. I had moved on from it completely. But I did not actually verify. I took the lawyer's word for it, and I did not follow up, and I did not check. I said, for 4 years, you were married to 2 women, and you did not check. He said, I did not know I was married to 2 women. I said, then why, when her lawyer called this morning, did you not call me immediately? He looked at the floor. He said, because I was afraid. I said, of what? He said, of this, of your face, of what you would think. I said, what I think is that you had information that directly affected my life, and you sat on it for 8 hours. He said, I know. I said, I need to know if our marriage is legal. He said, my lawyer is working on it. She says there is a clear path to resolution. Rebecca's divorce is being finalized now. Our marriage will need to be reviewed, possibly re-registered. It is a process, but it is resolvable. I said, resolvable legally? He said, yes. I said, what about the other thing? He said, I know. I said, do you? He looked at me. He said, tell me. I said, the other thing is that I do not know if our marriage was ever what I thought it was. Not because of the paperwork, because of the 8 hours. Because you sat across from me at dinner tonight, knowing what you knew, and watching Ellie's recital video on your phone and saying nothing. That is the thing I cannot resolve. He was quiet for a long time. He said, I should have called you the moment his lawyer called me. I said, yes. He said, I was wrong not to. I said, yes. He said, I'm sorry. I said, I know. I'm not ready to hear it yet. I need to tell you what the next 6 months looked like, because this story does not end in that living room on a Wednesday evening, and it would be wrong to let you think it does. The legal situation resolved within 4 months. Rebecca's divorce was finalized properly. Our marriage was legally examined by a family attorney named Gwen Park, who practices in Scottsdale and who was, throughout, bracingly clear about both the complexity and the path forward. She said, in Arizona, a bigamous marriage can be ratified once the impediment is removed. Your marriage is valid going forward, but you will need to re-register. Nathan and I re-registered our marriage on a Tuesday afternoon in April in a courthouse on Washington Street, with no ceremony and no witnesses beyond the clerk. It took 11 minutes. I wore the ring. The same ring Rebecca had on her finger when she stood on my front step. I want to tell you about the courthouse because it is not an event I have processed fully yet, and I am not certain I will for a long time. We drove there together. Nathan was in a suit because he had come from work. I was in the clothes I had worn to a site visit that morning, which meant a blazer and boots and the particular slightly dusty quality of someone who has spent part of their day standing in a building that is not yet finished. We parked on the street and walked to the entrance and went through security and found the right office and stood at the counter. The clerk was very matter-of-fact, which I appreciated. This was not an unusual situation for her. She processed the paperwork with the efficiency of someone who has processed many things like this and has learned not to attach significance to the individual files. She had us sign. She stamped. She handed us a copy. She said, "Congratulations." Nathan thanked her. We walked out. We stood on the courthouse steps in the April Phoenix heat, which is the particular heat of a desert city before summer has fully arrived. Warm, but not yet punishing, the sky very blue, the mountains visible to the east. He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "What can I do?" I said, "Be honest with me. From now on, in all things, be honest with me. Don't manage the information. Don't wait for solutions. Bring me the problem when there is a problem." He said, "I can do that." I said, "I know you can." "I need you to." He said, "I will." We stood in the courthouse steps for another minute. Then he took my hand and we walked back to the car, and I thought, this is the marriage I have chosen. The legal version, the fully documented version, the one registered on a Tuesday in April in a courthouse office by a clerk who said congratulations and meant it, or didn't. It didn't matter. And who handed us a copy. It is the marriage I wanted. It is just the marriage I had to choose twice. Nathan cried in the parking lot afterward. I held his hand and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say yet. The legal resolution and the emotional resolution were not the same event, and I had made peace with that. We were in couples therapy by then. A therapist named Dr. Carol Medina, who works in Central Phoenix and who had, in our first session, said something I have turned over many times since. The event itself may have been a paperwork failure. The 8 hours was a choice. Those are two different things to work with. We worked with both. What I learned in the months of that work is that Nathan had been, in the specific way of certain very competent people, accustomed to managing problems before they reached me. He had an instinct, formed early, reinforced professionally, to resolve things before he brought them, to not surface a problem until he had a solution. In his law practice, this made him excellent. In our marriage, on the Wednesday in October, it had made him the man who sat across from me at dinner, knowing something I deserved to know. I said to him in one of the therapy sessions, I don't need you to have solutions. I need you to tell me when there is a problem. He said, I'm learning how to do that. I said, I need you to understand that I am learning is not enough. I need you to actually do it. He said, I know. Dr. Medina said, what would it look like, Nathan, in practice, specifically? He thought about it. He said, it would look like calling Diana the moment I heard from Rebecca's lawyer, even before I understood what it meant, even when I was afraid of her reaction. I said, yes, that is exactly what it would look like. He said, I can do that. I said, show me. He has been showing me. For the 8 months since April, he has brought me the problems before the solutions, the fears before the resolutions, the incomplete pictures before they have been tidied. It is not always comfortable. There are things I now know about his anxiety, his relationship with failure, the specific terror of disappointing the people he loves, things I might have preferred not to know, or that required me to be a different kind of partner than I had been. I have tried to be that partner, not always successfully, but trying. I want to say something here about what the 8 months since April have actually looked like, because the arc of a story can make recovery sound cleaner than it is. There have been Tuesday evenings when I sat in the kitchen after therapy and felt nothing but exhausted. Not sad, not angry, just wrung out in the way of someone who has spent an hour saying true things in a room with fluorescent lighting and now has to go home and make dinner. There have been nights when I lay next to Nathan and thought about the 8 hours, the dinner, Ellie's recital video on his phone, his face when he answered my call, and felt something I do not have a clean name for. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. The specific feeling of having been, for those 8 hours, the only person in your own marriage who did not know the shape of it. I have said this to him, more than once, in more than one form. He has listened to all of it. That is the thing I want to tell you about Nathan. Not the 8 hours, not the paperwork, but what happened after. The specific quality of his response to having been confronted with himself at his worst. He did not minimize. He did not explain. He did not offer the version of the story where the 8 hours was a reasonable choice made under stress. He said, I was wrong. And he said it specifically, in the vocabulary of a man who understands that wrong means wrong, and not complicated by context or understandable given the circumstances. I needed that. I needed it more than I knew before I got it. There have also been mornings. Not mornings like the Wednesday. Ordinary mornings, the specific domestic mornings of a family that has a 6-year-old and 2 demanding jobs and a house with a garden that needs attention. Mornings when I watched Nathan make Ellie's lunch with the focused care he brings to everything, the specific love he has for our daughter that is so uncomplicated and so obvious and so real. Mornings when the complicated thing sits alongside the real thing and they do not cancel each other out. Dr. Medina said, about 4 months in, "What does the marriage feel like to you right now?" I thought about it. I said, "Like a house I know very well that has a room I didn't know was there. I'm still learning the room. I don't know yet if I like it. But the rest of the house is still the house." She said, "That's a useful way to hold it." I said, "It's the truest way I can describe it." She said, "Then that's where you are." That is where I am, still learning the room. The rest of the house is still the house. I want to tell you about Ellie's piano recital because it happened the night after Rebecca knocked on the door, and it is the hinge of this story in a way I did not understand until later. She played 2 pieces. The first was a simple arrangement of something classical that I cannot name now. I am not musical. I hear music, but I do not hold it. The second was a piece she had chosen herself, something her teacher had helped her learn that was a little beyond her level, that she had been practicing obsessively for 6 weeks. She sat at the piano. She was 6 years old. She placed her hands. She played it perfectly. I sat in the audience with Nathan beside me, and I watched my daughter play the piece she had chosen and practiced and worried about. And I thought, she does not know. She does not know what was in the folder on the hallway table when she came downstairs for a glass of water last night. She does not know about Rebecca or the papers or the 8 hours or any of it. She knows that she has been practicing this piece for 6 weeks and that tonight she played it without a mistake and that her parents are in the audience. That is what she knows. I thought, whatever is true about my marriage, that is also true. She played it perfectly. We were there. That is real and it belongs to us. And nothing in the folder on the hallway table can take it. That thought, not a resolution, not a decision, just that specific thought, was where I found something I could hold on to. It has been 9 months since the recital, 11 months since the Wednesday in October. Our marriage has been re-registered and is legal, and is, in the ways that matter to me, real. Not because of the paperwork, but because of the work we have done since the paperwork, the therapy sessions, the conversations in the kitchen after Ellie is in bed, the specific and ongoing act of 2 people deciding, every day, that what they have built is worth continuing to build. Rebecca and I have not spoken since the evening she came to my door. I thought about calling her once to say something. I was not sure what. I decided against it. What she had done was a kindness, the specific kindness of a stranger who owed me nothing and gave me everything anyway. I hope she is well. I hope her marriage, the legal one, is good. I hope she never has to stand on a stranger's front step to deliver news she did not ask to carry. I think about the ring sometimes, the coincidence of it, or not coincidence exactly, since Nathan had chosen the same ring twice, which says something about him that I am still turning over. Whether it says something about taste or memory, or the specific quality of wanting someone to have a ring they would not notice on their hand, because it was so simply and exactly right for them. I choose to believe the last thing. I am aware that this is a choice. There is a night I want to describe. About 3 months after the courthouse, in July, when the Phoenix heat was doing what it does in July, which is to become total, the kind of heat that is present even at midnight, that does not release the city the way other cities release the day. We were sitting in the backyard after Ellie was in bed. It is what we do on summer nights when the heat is not quite unbearable. Sit outside with something cold to drink and let the night be what it is. The backyard in Arcadia has the old trees that define the neighborhood, a big mesquite that casts shade all day and that makes the yard feel, in the darkness, inhabited in a way that backyards in newer neighborhoods do not. Nathan said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you ever wish Rebecca hadn't come to the door?" I thought about it honestly. This was the first time he had asked, and I wanted to answer it honestly. I said, "No, and yes, both." He said, "Tell me." I said, "No, because what she gave me was the truth. About our marriage and about you, about who you are under pressure, which I had not seen before. I needed to see it. I'm glad I did." He said, "And yes?" I said, "Yes, because there are things I cannot unknow now. Things about the 8 hours, about the paperwork, there are things I have to carry that I did not carry before October. And some days I feel the weight of that, and I wish I didn't." He said, "I'm sorry you carry that." I said, "I know. That doesn't make it lighter." He said, "No." We sat in the backyard for a while. The July night was very warm. The mesquite was very still. Somewhere on the street, a sprinkler came on, the particular domestic sound of a summer night in Phoenix, water on pavement. He said, "I want to say something." I said, "Okay." He said, "I am not the person I was in those 8 hours. I know that doesn't undo them. But I need you to know that I have looked at who I was in those 8 hours, and I have been, appalled is the right word. I have been appalled by it. And I am doing the work not to be that person again." I said, "I see that." He said, "Is it enough?" I thought about it. I said, "It's enough for today. Ask me again tomorrow." He said, "I will." I said, "I know." The sprinkler ran. The mesquite was still. The Phoenix night continued in its warm, unhurried way. I thought, this is also the marriage I have, the July backyard and the difficult question, and the answer that is enough for today. This is also real, and it is also mine. Last week, Ellie asked me about the piano. She said, "Do you think I'll ever be really good?" I said, "You're already really good." She said, "No, I mean really good, like concert good." I thought about it. I said, "I don't know, but I know that the only way to find out is to keep playing." She thought about that with the serious consideration that she gives to things that matter to her. She said, "Okay." She went back to practicing. The sound came through the walls of the house, the particular music of a child who is not yet technically flawless, but who is entirely committed, who is playing with everything she has. I stood in the kitchen and I listened to it, and I thought, this is also what we are. The house with the old trees, the kitchen at night, the child practicing piano in the next room. All of it. The folder on the hallway table and the courthouse parking lot and the therapy sessions and this ordinary evening, this music, this life that is complicated and real and ours. Both things. All of it. Mine. That is the story I am keeping.